Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, An Equitable Zero-Emission Vehicle Transition, Engagement Principles and Programs to Foster Inclusive Updates. I'm Sarah McBain. I'm a senior analyst with the Pembina Institute. For those of you who don't know us, the Pembina Institute is a think tank and a registered charity that advocates for strong, effective policies to support Canada's clean energy transition. The work we steward and those we serve span the lands of many Indigenous peoples. Today, I'm grateful to be joining from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. I share this acknowledgement and honor of the lands and in the spirit of truth, well-being, and contributing to a better pathway with and for Indigenous people. And with that said, I'd like to begin with welcoming the panelists we have joining us here today. It's a pleasure to introduce Kara Clareman, President and CEO of Plug and Drive Canada, Jana McKenney, Energy Commission Specialist with the California Energy Commission, Larry Rillera, Air Pollution Specialist with the California Air Resources Board, and Nikki Okup, with Deputy Director of Trucks and Off-Road at CalSTART. Today's webinar centers on the fact that a clean transportation future hinges on inclusivity. Zero-emission vehicles have the potential to offer significant benefits when it comes to public health and the environment. However, decision makers and agencies must guide the transition to zero-emission vehicles with care and intention to avoid deepening existing disparities in mobility access and pollution exposure. Considerations and thoughtful planning around groups facing steeper challenges in accessing and adopting zero-emission vehicles is essential. To start things off today, we'll have each panelist share a presentation on the work they have been doing to lead and advance an equitable zero-emission vehicle transition. We will then follow with a panel discussion and then a question and answer period with our audience. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any technical questions, someone will be monitoring the chat. So please do reach out if you are experiencing any technical issues. Today's webinar will also be recorded and made available. And once we get to the question and answer portion of the webinar, please do submit all questions in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. Kara, I'll now pass it on to you to begin with your presentation.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. So I'm just going to dive right into it. As you heard, my name's Kara Clareman. I'm the president and CEO of Plug and Drive. I'm going to spend just a minute on who's Plug and Drive in case you don't know us, and talk a little bit about the basics on EVs and why they make so much sense here in Canada in particular. And then talk a little bit about a project that Plug and Drive has been working on related to encouraging more women to get into EVs. So I'm just going to get started right now. So Plug and Drive, we're a nonprofit, not too dissimilar to Pembina, but we focus on electric vehicle education and adoption in Canada. We do it through all sorts of ways, but including ones like this with webinars, but mostly related to including a test drive, because we have found that the test drive really does seal the deal for people. So we try to take our show on the road and offer test drives all across Canada to make it easier for people to make the switch. We're very pleased to let you know that we've just launched a new program called EVs Are For Everyone. We're making our way across our whole beautiful country, and we'll be hopefully stopping somewhere near you. Reach out if you're really keen to have us hit your community, but we're traveling with these really awesome trailers, one in the east and one in the west, and we'll be hitting as many places we can over the next 2 years. I would be remiss as a nonprofit if I did not thank the sponsors that make our work possible. This just gives you an idea of who's supporting us, and we appreciate them so much. So thanks to all of them. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure everyone is on the same page with electric vehicles. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And so just really the very basic on why EVs make sense. Hopefully you're all convinced already, but you may or may not know that here in Ontario, transportation is the largest emitting sector. Pretty much every province of Canada, transportation is number one or number two. So we really can't hit our climate goals in Canada if we don't tackle transportation. And that's what's brought EVs to so much acclaim over the last number of years. They provide a ready-made opportunity to reduce emissions from transportation. I do just like to add that, of course, they're not the only way, and they're no silver bullet. We need to do all the different types of initiatives that we can to reduce emissions from transportation, which includes, bikeable, walkable cities and everything under the sun that you can think of. EVs are a great option for people who are going to drive anyway, and they're going to switch out a gas car for an electric car. We certainly don't want to get people who take transit to switch to cars because, of course, there's issues with congestion and all sorts of other things, but there are plenty of people who are going to drive, and so EVs make sense in that situation. Here in Ontario, this is the energy mix. We're at about 90% non-GHG emitting. Also, Quebec, British Columbia, Manitoba, nothing is zero, but almost zero emissions from their electricity. It's almost all hydroelectric in those provinces. And even in provinces where there's still coal or natural gas on the grid, you still get a pretty good reduction, not as good as in the hydro provinces where you get like a 95% plus reduction. But in Alberta, for example, you can get about 25 to 30% reduction, and same goes for Saskatchewan. So, everywhere in Canada, EVs take a huge bite out of the transportation emissions. We used to hear a lot of concerns around makes and models. That issue has pretty much gone away. We have so many different makes and models available in Canada today, with new ones coming out every week. We'll be at 100 makes and models by the end of this year, and even more in 2025. So really, this issue of I'm waiting for the truck, or I'm waiting, I need an SUV or whatever it is, that issue is pretty much gone in terms of concerns that consumers have. We do still hear concerns about range, although the reality is most of the EVs on the market now have at least 400 kilometers of range or even more. And so that really rivals a gas vehicle. And there's very few trips that people are going to do that need more than that. So great news on range, and just try to help people understand their needs. And finally, the one that I think is most poorly understood is the savings. We hear all sorts of concerns around the cost of EVs, that upfront sticker price or the lease cost. Yes, an EV does typically cost a little bit more than its gas equivalent, but there are rebates available, and the cost to run an EV is about 1/5 the price of gas. So if you're spending $1.50 a liter, I'm spending about 27 cents equivalent. And so over a couple of years, you pretty much make back any additional money you paid for the car. So the tricky part here is trying to help people understand their total cost of ownership and see that an EV in the long run is cheaper, even though upfront it might not be. We have a great tool on our website. If you want to just do your own calculation, it does the math for you. And you can take your own gas car, enter it in, say how much you drive, and then compare it to an EV, and it will produce a very lovely monthly graph showing how much you're going to save, and then showing, that sweet spot where you cross over and you're in the money. So check it out. It's really easy to use, and can help you see in your own use case how much money you'll save driving an electric car. So that part of the presentation really was just meant to help us all be on the same page around the benefits of EVs, economic and environmental. But as the title of this webinar is about equity and inclusion, I want to talk to you about a project that I've been working on with the Women in Renewable Energy, or WIRE, around why are women not choosing EVs. So we noticed in our own data of people who come to do test drives that it skews male very, very highly. And we collect data from our test drives all the time. And depending on the event, it varies, but it's always around 75 to 80% male. And we were very surprised by this data and started looking to see if other people were finding the same thing. And we did find in the UK and in the United States, when they collect data of who's buying EVs, it's pretty much the same, 75-25 men to women. And so the question is why? Why would that be? And of course, we all had our suspicions of why it might be. But so with WIRE, we did a survey of women who have not yet chosen an EV and why they were hesitating. There's a lot more research needed to be done. This was done in Canada. And if you're interested, there is a study behind it that I can share. It's very long and there were lots and lots of questions. So I'm just giving you the very highlights in this talk, but these were the main things that we found. We found that women were more concerned than men about safety. And not so much about the safety of the car. The cars actually have really great crash test ratings and are typically better, show up better on these kind of, black book studies and stuff around safety of the vehicle. So it wasn't that. It was safety when you're driving around or looking for a place to charge or being alone somewhere and having to charge, sort of like the concern that some women have of like being at a gas station late at night, but more so because a gas station at least usually has an attendant and lights and all that stuff. And a concern that some of these stations are remote and not visible and not lit, and that you're going to put yourself in danger. Unfortunately, there is some validity to that one. And I mean, I have experienced that myself. And so this led to a bunch of recommendations that we've made in terms of siting of stations, to have them grouped with other amenities, to have better lighting. And many, many are. And you can actually, when you choose which station you're going to go to, you can look to see on PlugShare what the situation is, where the charger is. But let's say you live more rural, remote, this is a more serious problem. So that was the number one concern that we didn't expect. The higher upfront cost, I just explained about total cost of ownership, but the higher upfront cost actually is a higher concern for women, perhaps because of economic disparities. So that was one. There was, of course, this issue of just not knowing, not really understanding EVs and not having the opportunity to learn or test drive them. And then just also not only the lack of safety around infrastructure, but just not being able to access it or not knowing where it would be. So those were the main findings. I'm going to leave it there because I want to leave time for the others and for the Q&A. I'll just wrap up with saying, if you are at all keen to try an EV in a very sort of peaceful setting where no one's trying to sell you anything, just non-biased and a non-sales environment, check out a list of events. Hopefully we're coming to a town near you soon. And I'm going to pass it over to Jana, who is our next presenter.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jana McKinney. I am an Energy Commission Specialist in the Fuels and Transportation Division at the California Energy Commission. And I work on several of the workforce development initiatives that are funded by our Clean Transportation Program, including the ideals of workforce pilot projects and workforce objectives from our recently published zero-emission vehicle workforce training and development strategy draft staff report. So I'd like to share with you 3 examples of initiatives that are funded by the Clean Transportation Program that really engage with diverse populations. So as Kara mentioned, the transportation sector is responsible for a significant amount of our greenhouse gas emissions, emissions that often burden vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. So the Clean Transportation Program was created in 2007, and it's provided more than $2.2 billion in funding for a broad spectrum of zero-emission vehicle and infrastructure projects for communities that will accrue the health, environmental, and economic benefits of those investments. Last year, in 2023, the Clean Transportation Program was reauthorized through 2035. The program provides about $100 million per year in funding, and workforce allocations vary from year to year, but on average, it's about $5 million per year that's dedicated to workforce development activities. So the first funding opportunity I'd like to share with you is our inclusive, diverse, equitable, accessible, and local, or ideal, ZEV workforce pilot. It's a partnership between the California Energy Commission and the California Air Resources Board that was launched in 2021. The solicitation awarded 14 projects, a total of $6.5 million, $1 million of which was co-funded by the California Air Resources Board. And projects supported workforce development in the fields of electric vehicle technology, charging infrastructure, hydrogen refueling infrastructure, as well as fleet, public transit, and freight operations. There were a wide variety of recipients, including state and community colleges, county and municipal organizations, nonprofits, and also equity groups. So the Ideal ZEV projects engage students from a diverse set of demographics by offering early career pathway development opportunities for high school students through integrating EV service technician courses at high schools with existing automotive programs. Some provided tuition assistance or work study opportunities for community college or university students. One of the programs also focused on upskilling incumbent municipal fleet automotive technicians and electricians by providing additional training and apprenticeship opportunities. Projects also provided technical training programs for California veterans, disabled veterans, and military personnel. So there were a wide variety of recipients. I'd like to highlight one of the Ideal ZEV projects that was awarded to the Community Resource Project. It's a nonprofit targeting low-income and disadvantaged communities here in Sacramento County. The program was called the ZEV Sustainable Equitable Employment Destination, or ZEV SEED program. It was a $500,000 award to develop curriculum and provide 60 hours of classroom training and 84 hours of hands-on training to 71 individuals. Classroom training utilized virtual reality programs, live in-class demonstrations, soft skill lessons, site tours, and industry guest speakers. The Community Resource Project also partnered with the California Mobility Center to deliver hands-on training labs that provided students with an opportunity to become familiar with electrical workplace safety, electric vehicle charger installation, battery replacement, vehicle maintenance, and electric forklift operations. So I'll provide a link in the chat to the project's final report. But what I really wanted to touch on was the 5 cohorts of students that completed this training program. They were refugees, women, automotive industry workers, construction industry workers, and also young adults. So I'd like to share with you some of the key features that were used to support each cohort of students. I mentioned the first cohort included refugees from Afghanistan and Ukraine. So in addition to translating the course materials into Dari and Russian, the program also paired trainees with limited English proficiency with individuals who have stronger English skills to better succeed in lab and classroom activities. Trainings were also scheduled to align with the availability of each cohort. So automotive and construction industry workers were offered training sessions after working hours. The women and youth cohorts were scheduled during normal working hours. And the high school graduate cohort was scheduled during their summer break. The Community Resource Project also provided transportation stipends and offered childcare services to improve the program's accessibility for trainees. So the end result was the program led to employment opportunities for about 20 individuals. Other graduates from the program went on to pursue additional education or internship opportunities, such as electrical line work apprenticeships. The second grant funding opportunity I'd like to share with you is our Tribal Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Planning and Workforce Training and Development Solicitation. We choose long names for these. So the solicitation was originally released in January, but I wanted to provide a little bit of background information about the Energy Commission's interactions with tribes. In 2023, tribal leaders and commissioners from the Energy Commission and also the California Public Utilities Commission met at a tribal en banc to share perspectives and priorities on advancing clean energy. During the en banc, the Energy Commission approved a resolution recognizing and committing to support California tribal energy sovereignty and independence. So this resolution actually builds on Governor Gavin Newsom's 2019 executive order that acknowledged and apologized for historical harms inflicted on California Native Americans and reaffirming the principles of government-to-government engagement with tribes. The resolution established goals like increasing access to funding, enhancing consultation and economic diversification. So we understand that at the Energy Commission, past funding opportunities for ZEV infrastructure may not have addressed the unique capacity building needs of tribes. So this tribal infrastructure solicitation was released to offer a dedicated tribal-focused funding opportunity that was intended to support deployment of reliable and resilient EV infrastructure to serve tribes. Eligible activities for the $10 million solicitation included installing EV infrastructure and also resiliency equipment, planning activities for EV adoption and also infrastructure projects, and workforce development that's related to electric vehicle infrastructure, or related technologies. So applicants could apply for one or any combination of those project activities. We expect the notice of proposed awards for the solicitation to be released this fall. So I don't have any information on specific awarded projects right now. But what I wanted to do was share with you, I think, four of the key components of this solicitation that helped improve funding access for tribes. So first, staff recognize that tribes may not have the internal capacity to apply for or administer large projects. So for this solicitation, a third party, or what we call the tribal authorized representative, was allowed to apply as the primary grant recipient on behalf of a tribe. They needed to have written consent from the tribe, and the project also needed to benefit the tribe. In addition to tribes that are federally recognized here in the United States, Tribes that were included on the California Native American Heritage Commission contact list, but may not be federally recognized, were also eligible for funds. The second thing we noticed was that the Clean Transportation Program has largely not offered funding for resiliency technologies like solar, battery backup systems, things that are necessary to support EV chargers and access in communities with unreliable electrical utility access. So we did include resiliency equipment as an eligible funding activity in this solicitation. Third, no matching funds were required for this solicitation. This was an acknowledgement of the economic constraints faced by tribes. And finally, in the past, agreements with tribes, the Energy Commission had required tribes to sign a waiver of sovereignty. We did not require that for this solicitation, which I think was very helpful with increasing access to this funding for tribes. So the last solicitation I want to share with you is for technical assistance. The Energy Commission is committed to providing opportunities for priority populations to participate in and benefit from all funding opportunities. So I'd like to share some information on a technical assistance program that's available to support communities with applying for ZEV infrastructure funding. So we know that priority populations often face barriers due to systematic marginalization. They may lack awareness and understanding of available funding programs. Most of these priority communities lack organizational capacity, a limit of staff time, limiting financial resources, and possibly a limit in expertise to apply for these funding opportunities. Some of these priority communities may also lack the relationships across local agencies or partner organizations to successfully execute their projects. So if you're providing technical assistance through each individual solicitation, that kind of assumes that under-resourced applicants are already aware of the funding opportunities. So I'd like to share this next example that provides a more holistic approach to technical assistance. It's the technical assistance for ZEV infrastructure solicitation. And it's coming out soon this fall. We're seeking one or more third-party implementers who can provide technical assistance to Justice 40 communities, disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, tribes, and also local governments that are applying for state or federal funding for ZEV infrastructure projects. The end goal is to facilitate successful applications and also to support the project implementation for projects that deliver meaningful benefits to under-resourced communities. So proposed activities that the technical assistance provider would deliver include educational awareness and helping communities understand the eligibility criteria for solicitations. They would assist in developing the project proposals, including feasibility studies or environmental impact assessments. They'd also be able to assist with financial modeling for your project. They'd also help communities understand a realistic timeframe for project sitting, permitting, and construction. And also, if their application is approved, they'd be able to provide assistance to achieve the program objectives. So this would be could include compliance and reporting back to the Energy Commission. So as I mentioned, this is kind of a more holistic approach that includes awareness of many different funding opportunities and not just providing technical assistance for the application, but providing assistance all the way through project implementation. So thank you. Those were the three solicitations I'd like to share. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the ideals of workforce projects, the tribal infrastructure solicitation, or technical assistance solicitation. And next, I'd like to introduce to you Larry Riella from the California Air Resources Board.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to thank Pembina Institute and Sarah McBain for the tremendous opportunity to share California's story and the work of the California Air Resources Board. I will provide a little bit of context on the state, California, some of the work we're doing on the regulations, and then kind of drill down a little bit more in terms of the tools we're using and the communities we're reaching in terms of our outreach and engagement strategies. As context, California has nearly 40 million people. It is the 5th largest global economy. And in terms of a comment that was made a little bit earlier, CARB, the California Air Resources Board, has identified 256 medium and heavy duty ZEVs certified for sale in California. This is for 40 manufacturers. There are also the accompanying infrastructure for light duty vehicles and the heavy duty vehicles and fast chargers as well. For those of you who may not know, the California Air Resources Board is the primary state agency responsible for air quality. CARB works with 35 local air pollution control districts in addressing pollution and climate impacts. One of the tools and context for this conversation, and certainly the work of the Institute and the work of Sarah, is this CalEnviroscreen tool that California uses. The tool is a geospatial data tool that maps over 8,000 census tracts that aid in equitable decision-making. There are 21 state indicators used in this model to characterize both pollution burden and population characteristics. Scoring is mapped so that respective communities can be compared. Later on in the presentation, I will show how we've used this tool to lean in intentionally for the, quote, hardest to reach communities. Starting at the top, California has a history over the last 10 years or so in developing action plan for ZEVs. The current ZEV market development strategy was released 3 years ago and has 4 pillars. One of the pillars is vehicles, another is infrastructure, the third is end users, and lastly, the fourth is a focus on workforce. The common thread throughout this strategy and in the previous action plans is that equity in every decision. This construct and the strategy and the action plans is based on our governor's executive order. But what I would draw your attention to is we have a separate compendium, if you will, to the strategy focused on equity and engagement. So starting with our heavy duty regulations and our clean transportation initiatives, I will talk a little bit about this sector as opposed to the light duty sector and outreach and engagement. California is not alone when it comes to deploying clean, heavy duty, zero emissions vehicles. There are currently 12 other states that have adopted California's light duty advanced clean cars regulation and 8 other states that have adopted our medium and heavy duty advanced clean trucks regulation. The advanced clean trucks or ACT states comprise about 1/4 of the US new heavy duty vehicle sales revenue and is focused on the manufacturers of these technologies. In addition to these 17 states, including the District of Columbia and the Province of Quebec, have signed a memorandum of understanding committing to transportation electrification across both the medium and heavy duty sectors. As you can see from the map, all West Coast states and Nevada have adopted the ACT regulation and committed to zero emission vehicle deployments. that was a focus on the advanced clean trucks and the manufacturers so that they provide the supply of the necessary zero emission equipment down the road. The companion to the ACT affecting the end users in the fleets is the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation. The Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation has 4 components. First is the 100% zero emission vehicle sales requirement that I had mentioned, or the ACT. And then there are 3 separate fleet components with specific requirements for drayage fleets, state and local government fleets, and high priority fleets. I'm going to shift gears here now and talk about 4 examples, recent examples of public engagement that CARB has embarked on. One of them is the ZEV Equity Task Force, which is under our Advanced Clean Cars, our light duty vehicles. The second is our ACF, our Advanced Clean Fleets, and a truck regulation implementation group. And there are 4 groups in this area. The trig borders, which I'll focus a little bit of our attention today. The third engagement activity I want to draw your attention to is our electric vehicle charging infrastructure strike force. I will call attention to this because this is a public-private partnership, or P3, done in concert with NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and others. And the role of this sector in providing education awareness in this space is critical. And lastly, a new initiative we launched earlier this summer, our Clean Transportation Regional Outreach Coordinators. The ZEV Equity Task Force was established, again, as I had mentioned, our Advanced Clean Cars Regulation. I am simply drawing your attention to this slide because of its diversity with respect to the topics covered and the audience where we sought input and shared experiences. And that is a focus on rural communities and tribal communities. We had participation from several tribes. One of them is their own tribal energy authority, which is an interesting component to the TE, transportation electrification, and outreach strategies. We also had a tribally owned, woman-owned, veteran-owned business enterprise, successful, by the way, in installing electric vehicle chargers as part of their core business strategy, but now have diversified into other decarbonization, energy decarbonization work as well. But this simply highlights an engagement that has been going on for the last 2 years with a specific and intentional discussion in these areas. I had also mentioned our TRIG work, Transportation Regulation Implementation Group. This particular group is focused on the southern part of California in connection with northern Mexico, or Baja Norte. This focus on the border is very critical. Both California and Baja are very interested in zero emissions, binational cooperation, and lots of front, not just the transportation electrification sector, but certainly pollution and economic strategies as well. I think I want to introduce that economic strategy because that is really key to not just the technologies and deployments, but from a community perspective, participation and enjoying the benefits from public investments. But the TRIG border is an ongoing quarterly meeting of both sides of California and Baja. The Electric Vehicle Charging Infrastructure Strike Force was a convention of the California Electric Transportation Coalition, a nonprofit entity. There were participants by market, corporate, everywhere in the EV infrastructure space, including environmental justice and other folks interested in advancing transportation electrification in California. One of the areas that was deliberately invested in was a 20+ month project I had led under the Electric Vehicle Charging in Communities effort. This is with our environmental justice, our community groups, to look at the complete suite of, one, defining what EV charging equity is, to looking at the various segments and markets in which communities are impacted or have interest in accruing the benefits of investments, but they were also interested and cautious of identifying disbenefits and harms of these investments as well. So I'll draw your attention to this P3. The other value of looking at a third party with respect to this dynamic of outreach and engagement is that some of these members are the trusted leaders of these communities. So to bring them into a safe space in which to share their not community perspective, but also their community values, and then letting us transparently see and become aware of our actions and include their voices in a particular document, in this case, the Equity Work Group report. Lastly, I want to draw your attention to an initiative we launched this summer. There were several community meetings we had earlier this year. We rolled out this concept of regional coordinators. We have dedicated staff, 2 in each region, 3 regions of the state, North, Central, and South. The whole idea is that we would go into communities, listen to communities and their values and their ideas around clean transportation generally, but anything in sort of the clean space with respect to clean energy as well, and some of these other associative or adjacent issues that were of importance to communities. So we meet them at where they are at in terms of language, in terms of capacity, in terms of place, because place matters. So staff has gone out into these areas, and we will do our first set of analytics on this later this year on the CT ROCKS effort. Lastly, I want to focus in on what does it mean to lean into, quote, hardest to reach communities? Where is the tools? What do we mean? How do we define this? And so part of the Clean Transportation ROCKS effort was the development of a work plan. This section on targeted geographies, audiences, venues, this is the specific language and direction provided to the ROCKS staff. And that is, one of them is that Cal Enviro screen. Typically, the state uses the 75th percentile as the minimum threshold or the bottom threshold in which to start making decisions and awards for public funds. We broke this up into the 90th to 100th percentile as a focus, and then 75th to 90th percentile. It's not a small distinction in that 10th percentile is a very dynamic, very intentional community that we're looking at. We also included a racial and ethnically diverse profiles. This is embedded in the tool for the Cal Enviro screen, and simply we use this geospatial tool to help get at these communities. We also looked at 2 other areas of this tool, which was linguistic isolation and the housing burden. Those were the 3 areas we intentionally weaved into our outreach strategies this first go this year. And then the 4th one is the rural, unincorporated, and agricultural communities, as well as tribal and border regions. This last point on the immediately adjacent communities is very important. Last year, I had the privilege of working on a project with about 40 tribes in California. And we talked, Jana talked a little bit about capacity, but it's the adjacent communities to not just the rural areas, but some of the tribal areas where you see the businesses and commerce, the contractors and other supply chain participants that are very important to providing solutions to tribal communities. So adjacent communities, that additional layer is called out with some intentionality. And that's it. Thank you. I think I'll pass it over to Nikki now.
My name is Nikki. I work on the California HVIP program, which is one of the sort of variety of investments that Larry just mentioned. We are funded by the California Air Resources Board. I actually work for CalSTART, which is the nonprofit administrator of this and other incentive programs. So what I'd like to talk about a little bit today is sort of how we are learning to reach out to small fleets. First rule of all of this, right? Before you speak for someone, make sure you speak to them. So we went out and conducted some focus groups and some surveys to really hear from small fleets of what their challenges were in adopting zero-emission trucks and buses. I think that it's interesting to note actually that the first 6 on this chart here actually don't have to do with money, which is interesting. Money is very important. The incentives that we offer are quite generous. And when we finally did get further down the line with a lot of these fleets, smaller fleets do in fact need higher incentives to get over that upfront total cost, that upfront sort of higher cost for zero emission technology. But let's talk about what the things were that they really needed too. They were very unsure about the vehicles at all. They actually had as I think Cara pointed out about EV cars as well, right? They were very early on in sort of the adoption and knowledge curve. So they really needed much greater assurances that this technology was real, that it actually worked. Where did they want to get those assurances from? They wanted to get it from peers. So they were looking for real world examples. They wanted to hear from other truckers and fleet managers who'd been able to integrate this new technology into their business operations. Again, to Cara's great point earlier, they wanted to kick the tires. They really want to drive these trucks, right? They really want to try it out and see and feel that it's very real. And then we started to get down to issues of price. They really wanted clear understanding of total cost of ownership, maintenance cost over the vehicle's lifetime, charging costs, installation of infrastructure costs, et cetera. Again, they really wanted more peer referrals. They wanted more knowledge. So with all of this, armed with all of this, we worked with the California Air Resources Board and California HVIP program to sort of develop two answers for this. So one of them is ISEF, which stands for the Innovative Small E-Fleet Set-Aside within HVIP. So as I mentioned off to the side here, there is more funding. So we define small fleets as fleets that have less than 20 vehicles and less than $15 million in revenue, and they receive actually double the normal incentive levels. And so that's close to 90% of the overall vehicle cost. So it's a very generous incentive for smaller fleets to get them over the hump there. But we also realized that they needed additional flexibility, right? They wanted to be able to try it before they buy it. They wanted to be able to test that this technology was going to fit into their duty cycle. So typical grant programs maybe don't allow for things like rentals or truck as a service agreements. But in this sort of innovative small e-fleet set aside, we are allowing for both additional funding and additional flexibility. I think definitions are really important here. So again, I'll mention that we defined small fleets as fleets that have less than 20 vehicles and less than $15 million in revenue. This program is open to all public companies, private companies, agencies, nonprofits, individual owner operators, fleets who are just starting out, who may not even own their own vehicles yet. So again, really trying to reduce a lot of those barriers to entry and limitations to allow maximum flexibility and access. How did the program go? So over the first couple of years, it was incredibly active. We had over $100 million in funding requested. I will admit that I actually expected it to be from some of the fleets on the larger side, maybe 10, 15, 20 unit size companies. In fact, our average fleet size was quite small, 5. And we had folks doing a variety of different arrangements, including purchases. Again, I mentioned truck as a service. For those of you who aren't familiar, truck as a service is sort of like a subscription plan where you are leasing both the truck and the charger and probably a parking spot to go with it in a sort of package agreement. We have some traditional financing and rental options as well. Now, to address the second group of concerns that surfaced to us through our focus groups and our surveys, we also developed a complimentary fleet advisory service called Cal Fleet Advisor. Now, there are some things like this. There are certainly technical assistance programs like this that are available through local utilities. Some things are, sometimes offered by ports, but for us, we wanted to offer something, again, that had a very low barrier to entry. So our intake form is incredibly simplified. We have a toll-free number. You can really just call to ask a very simple question, or if you were just sort of looking for a referral to a dealer. So we have a very low level of commitment, right? We don't require fleets to sign up for like a full fleet electrification 6-month planning process. And we like to offer them sort of a broad spectrum of information. So again, as I mentioned, it's sort of like a concierge. We could sort of act as like a virtual project manager. We've got a team of a few Cal fleet advisors. We meet up with fleets at public events. We host a lot of ride and drive events. We go to fleets where they are, if that's in associations or regional groups, to provide on-site assistance, to answer questions, but then also we can do longer-term planning. We have a tool which is similar to Cara's, where a fleet can give us their sort of fleet data, and we can generate a fleet plan for them that would demonstrate sort of what vehicles fit their duty cycle and their needs, along with costs, available incentives, and overall savings. So with that, I just want to get back, quickly sort of to what we also learned about best practices for sort of how to reach. Small fleets are a tough demographic to work with. I think anybody who's ever done technical assistance for small businesses know that they are incredibly busy, incredibly overburdened. So some important things to remember is that, when you're talking to these folks, you really have to hear them and hear what they're saying. And then I think it's really important to compensate them for their time. So a lot of these small business owners, if they're spending an hour in a focus group with me, giving me their expertise, they're probably missing doing a turn at the port, right? So they're missing out on business. And for that, they deserve to be, aptly compensated for giving us their expertise. So we make sure to of course, pay our focus group participants and fleets who give us testimonials, right? We're really trying to build a video library, so that, fleets like hearing from other fleets. Design the programs. As I mentioned, a lot of our design elements have things to reduce the burden. So HVIP in general is a very low burden sort of type of program because the dealer usually takes care of most of the paperwork. But we work really hard to simplify it, especially for small fleets. Go to your end user where they are. I think that many of us as sort of government, nonprofit, and agency professionals very often build things and really hope that our desired audience will find it. But that's not always true. Small business owners especially are super focused on running their business and not necessarily out there looking for grant opportunities. Certainly not in the way that large fleets have, grant staff whose job it is to find these things. So that means we have to work double time to get out there in front of fleets. Which means, publishing articles, advertisements, et cetera, in, fleet publications, finding them on social media, going to their in-person events. And then, of course, build in opportunities to adjust all of your assumptions. We have definitely treated our ISEF program and our Cal Fleet Advisor programs and in many ways as sandboxes and learning labs where we are trying to closely document sort of what's working and not working so that we can develop best practices to share with folks like you and also improve our programs over time. I'll leave you with a couple of resources. If folks are interested in sort of what's going on across the country, we've got this great tool that we just launched, which is the ZET Ahead dashboard, and you can take a look at, what other states are doing and what policies are sort of working and how they're getting to their goals there. And I've also got here a couple of reports. This last one, the Taking Charge report, which is one that we did with dream.org. That's where we surveyed those 500 fleets. So all of those findings are in that report. We definitely take a lot of cues from the US DOT promising practices for meaningful public involvement. And a personal favorite, I always read the California Environmental Justice Alliance annual scorecard. Sometimes they give us good scorecards. Sometimes they give us, ways to improve, but it's a great resource. Here's how to reach us at California HVIP and the ISEF program specifically. Thanks very much. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Sarah. I hope we have time for discussion and questions.
Thank you so much, Nikki, and thank you so much to our other panelists for such interesting and great presentations featuring all of the work that you've been doing. So we'll turn now to have a sort of discussion period. And I think given the time that we have left, what I might do is invite our audience to submit any questions that they have in the question and answer function at the bottom of their screen. And I'll mix those in as we go about this discussion period so that we can do a little bit of both, get to what the audience wants to hear, but also some of these questions that we've prepared. So first off, I think what I'll do is sort of open up a question that I think we would love to hear from each of you on is, so, you know, as we begin our discussion talking about the importance of advancing equity in the zero-emission vehicle transition, we're seeing the sales of these vehicles increase a lot in Canada and in the US. So I think just a starting spot would be interesting to hear from each of you, you know, why is it important really that we enhance access to zero-emission vehicles, and why is it so critical for a successful transition?
Can anyone jump in here?
Anyone?
I have two answers. So my first one always is, right, to a certain extent, we have an obligation because so much of this work that all of us here in this room do, right, these policies, these incentive programs, the regulations were initially sort of envisioned and advocated for by pollution overburdened populations. So I think that, you know, there's an obligation there for sure, because it would be ironic, if not hypocritical, for them to have worked so hard to raise awareness and sort of wave the flag on these issues, and then for us to not turn around and try to serve them directly. But the second reason is we'll never get there without them. In California, I think 80% of the trucks on the road are operated by fleets who have less than 20 trucks in their fleet. So, you know, we have some amazing regulation coming down the pipeline that's going to really drive adoption by larger fleets. Eventually, those vehicles will make it into sort of smaller women, minority-owned businesses. But really, if we want to meet our goals, we're going to need that big 80% of the population adopting zero-emission technologies in short orders, and they deserve to. There's a really great cost of ownership. There's a really great fuel savings available to them. There's no reason that they should have to wait simply because they didn't have access to information about how to adopt them.
Yeah, I'd be happy to just add on to that. I mean, I agree, we can't hit our targets without them. And so in the case of women, it's interesting to note that actually studies show that women usually make the car buying decision for the family, and they're not choosing EVs. So that means we're selling a lot less EVs than we could be. And so it's really important that we help get the message to these folks, because as we'll be stuck in these low numbers, sort of in the 15 to 20%, and we won't get up there to and I know California and Canada also has really ambitious goals to hit certain targets of EV sales, and we have no chance of getting there if we don't have all communities involved.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's really critical in terms of our ability to meet, you know, emission reduction goals in the transportation sector and overall climate objectives. You know, I think there's also an important point in terms of what some of you touched on when it comes to the environmental sort of burden that some of these communities face, where they're disproportionately impacted by diesel emissions. And so there is really a public health benefit as well as in terms of moving all communities along in the transition. I don't know, Larry or Jenna, if you want to add anything else to this question in particular, but I'll leave it open in case you do, and if not, we can move on to sort of the next question.
Yeah, I think they were great responses. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing to add on the vehicle side from me.
Great. So the next question I thought I would pose is, how can agencies and government facilitate equitable zero-emission vehicle engagement? Each of you have talked a little bit about some of what you've been doing and working on, and the work you've been doing to specifically undertake engagement and outreach activities in diverse communities. So what are important considerations and practices to scale zero-emission vehicle engagement and ensure that, underrepresented or hard to reach groups are receiving opportunities and information?
About 2 weeks ago, the California Air Resources Board and 50 member state agencies did a tour of the southern part of the state, the Imperial Valley. It's primarily agrarian, but lots of tribal nations and some other things. It's on the border. I had mentioned that in my presentation, but it goes to the point that place still matters. So while we talk about it and while we do it, we have to show up. Presence is everything as well. So, that trust, that continued dialogue in this space is really, really important. So in order to effectuate the policies and the strategies, we still have to build that community rapport and listening. One of the days for those, for the 3 days that we spent down there was an evening community session, monolingual. And that's exactly what we need to do to go into these spaces to listen, because it's going to take a long time for the education, just like it did for the early adopters when you start looking at who was buying these early vehicles on the light duty vehicle side. But the same sorts of principles also apply in the medium and heavy duty side, but the investments, of course, are a lot higher, and bottom line businesses and all the other imperatives that are important to commerce in the heavy space.
Yeah, I think, I'd second what Larry said, and hopefully without repeating it, but scaling community organizing is always quite hard, right? Because it's built on one-on-one relationships in so many ways. But I did find that for sure, here in California, we had a project called AB 617. I know, just a collection of letters and numbers that probably doesn't mean much to you folks, but it really did community-based sort of sessions. And I think in those instances, you certainly found out that as folks learned about zero emission technology, they were much more willing to talk about it with their peers, and people respect more than anything peer-to-peer referrals and recommendations. So that's my only addition to what Larry said, is we have to get there and then bring the information, and then it's really from there that folks do that type of connecting the dots. I mean, literally there were moms taking stacks of our flyers and saying, oh, I'll give this to all of, my neighbors and uncles who I know are truck drivers.
Yeah, I think that trust piece is so important when it comes to engagement. And Larry, I do remember talking to you before about, engagement and how do we reach these groups in a meaningful way. And I remember you describing to me the difference between, authentic versus performative engagement and the importance of, building trust and elongated engagement so that, these communities feel that they're being heard and we're listening to the challenges and when it comes to adoption. And I think that that's so important, is that sort of involvement and buy-in as well. Jenna and Kara, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of, what are important considerations? What should agencies and government consider in sort of the work that they might do to advance equitable zero-emission vehicle adoption?
The only thing that I would add is, so many agencies and governments are really doing a lot, actually, with incentives, with programming, with education, all kinds of stuff. The one area in Canada where I feel like we've really kind of dropped the ball is with building codes. And a lot of lower income folks are living in apartments, and they're missing the boat on EVs because, you know, those buildings are not, it's so expensive to retrofit. And so I really feel like if governments are going to put money into infrastructure, I would like to see more of it going to that, and to make sure that we have the building code changes that would support that happening. And then the only other thing I just say, you know, that all the responsibility shouldn't fall on governments and agencies. Like companies can do a lot too. And I sometimes think they just kind of don't think about what they could do for their employees, for their visitors, you know, by putting in workplace charging, by offering educational opportunities for employees. And so just like we do for wellness or other things that we offer our employees. So I just put my little pitch in there for companies to step up and participate.
I would say and add to that that the role of the public sector must be in tandem with the private, with the OEMs on the vehicle side, the OEMs on the charger side, because it is their familiarization with those products that communities must become. And so when you have the manufacturer, the producer of that asset in the room with government to talk about the incentives and the role that they can play collaboratively in an emerging industry, will go a long way. So certainly echo Cara's comments.
I also wanted to add what a tremendous opportunity I think workforce development is, especially when you're thinking about early career pathway development for like high school students and college students. I think when you're part of a underrepresented community or a priority population, zero emission vehicles just don't seem accessible to you right now. And to be able to have that first interaction, like in your high school automotive program, that yes, this is something that's within my reach, I think is a tremendous opportunity to have those kids take that home and share it with their families, that yes, this is within our reach and this is how we can participate in this, new green economy.
Yeah, thank you all for such excellent answers on that. I think that's also an interesting addition, Jana, in terms of building in those opportunities early on in high school and even earlier sometimes in the educational system. I'm looking at some of the other questions we have here. So, one thing that comes to mind is when it comes to deploying programs or policies to advance zero emission vehicle uptake, what do agencies or governments need to consider to ensure those investments and programs are distributed to underserved groups? So I know, Jenna, you talked a little bit about the technical assistance solicitation. So I don't know if you want to start there and just talking about some of the things that, were important in that program, but also to the others. I mean, what are some of the important considerations to really channel that funding to those who need it most?
So this was actually a question or similar question during our pre-solicitation workshop for the ZEV infrastructure technical assistance solicitation. And the two takeaways that I got from that panel discussion was from an Energy Commission's perspective to look internally at our history. Where are we geographically and demographically providing funding to? So you can identify where there's been a lack of engagement, and that should help focus your outreach on those areas. The other thing I took away from the pre-solicitation workshop was there's not one size fits all solution to like technical assistance. Technical assistance programs that utilize some sort of like pre-proposal phase that give you an opportunity to like assess each individual's needs, I think makes a better use of your technical assistance funds, because some recipients may need one-on-one support all the way from applying for the funds all the way through like project execution. While other priority populations might just need access to tools or resources or occasional office hours or advice on how to layer opportunities and funding initiatives. So just that there's no blanket solution to this. It's more complicated than that.
Yeah, I think I would jump in and add that, for us on the HVIP side, we for a very long time, the way that we defined whether or not our program was serving a disadvantaged community was the address of where the truck was located, right? So where the vehicle is domiciled and whether or not those pollution reduction benefits are going to what Larry had referred to, what we use as the Callan virus screen mapping. Those are very real and very practical pollution reduction. But a question that we hadn't asked was whether or not those vehicles, those dollars, right, that economic benefit was going to, as women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, locally-owned businesses, small businesses. We hadn't been asking those questions, and you can't improve what you don't measure. So for anybody who's out there designing programs, it is very important to ask those questions. Here in California, because of legislative changes that I think I recall happening when I was a kid, we can't put any funding by sort of race or gender, right? So we instead do it by fleet size. We know that most small businesses tend to be women and minority owned, but if you can ask those things and you can write your grants and proposals to serve very specific communities that are typically left behind in these types of things, I would just say get specific and measure everything.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that is, even though I represent one state agency and Jenna represents one state agency, from a community perspective, it's important that no one gets left behind, as Nikki says, and that isn't not only in terms of the dollars for deployment, for uptake of vehicles in the transportation space, but that's also that communities are able to harness the economic ecosystems. So their businesses and the contractors and everybody else reside in the backyards and things like this. So, ensuring cross-agency collaboration for the policies we construct and to the communities that we're reaching out to are vitally important.
Yeah, that's a great addition, and it really ties into the next question that I was going to suggest, which was, how have partnerships, coalitions, or working groups help drive some of the outcomes or scaled efforts in the work that each of you have been doing? I think it's, you just touched on that a little bit, Larry, but it would be helpful to hear from others in terms of the role that that's played.
So I'd like to share that the Energy Commission signed a MOU earlier this year with the California Workforce Development Board. The MOU is for the board to provide expertise in workforce development strategies, policy, technical assistance, and also help us identify opportunities and resources. So my team has been meeting regularly with the California Workforce Development Board to discuss the objectives in our workforce strategy, and also just open the available contacts for us to help complete those objectives, because so here at the Energy Commission, we are probably not the subject matter expert to do a labor market analysis. And working with the Workforce Development Board has really helped us connect to different state agencies and institutions to help us find that expertise that we need to complete these objectives.
Our situation actually quite similar. We partnered with the Women in Renewable Energy to do this research project on why women aren't choosing EVs. And interestingly, they're more of a group that focuses on mentorship to help younger women get into renewable energy type roles. And then we started talking about this project. We're like, well, we should also look at what's the opportunity for women to get into the EV space. And so it kind of morphed from just being a project about why aren't women buying EVs to like also why aren't women working in the EV sector. And in the final report, it was sort of we tried to cover both off and make recommendations on ways to address both. So that was a really nice outcome. And another one that we work with the Indigenous Clean Energy, which is a group here in Canada that partners with a whole host of Indigenous communities to put in clean energy projects. And so it seemed like the perfect group to sort of reach those communities to start talking about EVs. And so just another one where I feel like without that partnership, it would be really hard for me and my team to figure out how do we reach those communities. So super helpful to have those kind of partners.
Yeah, for CalStart, so CalStart as a nonprofit is also an industry membership association, right? So our members sort of span the EV sector, and I think that our members bring a lot of great sort of like collaboration and insight to our work. Most of the truck makers and OEMs and charger manufacturers are members, and through them we sort of learn like what are their policy priorities, where are they seeing movement in, say, battery pricing, or what are they seeing on the landscape regulatory wise? And I think that those sorts of collaborations, reaching back into industry, speaking directly to the folks that are making the trucks and selling the trucks and installing the chargers, has really been an important part of sort of how we connect the dots within industry and develop better programs for our constituents.
Thanks, each of you, for such great answers on that question. I think those are all really good examples of how partnerships have helped sort of accelerate or enhance some of these programs and the outcomes that they've had. I'm going to look to some of the questions that we've received from the audience. So there's actually one in the chat, and I think, Jenna, it might be for you. So the question is, do the workforce training bits, Jenna, and some of the others mentioned include work placements / paid opportunities, or is it just an in-house or free training after which they can go out on their own?
So some of like the ideals of workforce pilot projects provided internship opportunities, and also provide support services like job placement, reviewing job applications, coaching on interview skills. I think what I've noticed is that training programs that are designed with a specific like employer or outcome in mind, or tying in your employers that are located in your vicinity while you're designing the training program, goes a long way to ensuring that once people graduate from your training program, they have someplace to go in their next step. Whether that could be to another apprenticeship program with a utility service provider or a union, or if they just making sure that as you're developing your training program, you're also considering the next steps for people that finish the training program. Otherwise, it seems like you finish the training program and then nothing happens. So making sure there's a pathway after the training program is very important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's another question here in the chat, and I'm not sure whoever feels like they want to try and answer it, feel free. But the question is, have you experienced challenges with electricity system infrastructure, example, transmission system, distribution system, keeping up with this transition, especially in more isolated areas?
So I can probably take that one too. In the example of our tribal infrastructure solicitation, access to reliable utility services was a huge barrier for tribes. The CEC has several different like block grant programs to install EV charging infrastructure, but they often have caps on the total amount of funding that's available either per charger or per port. So they weren't really an option for tribes because if you don't have the utility service to run the charger, what's the point of putting the charger in? So I think one of the important things we were able to include in that solicitation was to allow funding for solar or battery backup systems. And also they have some neat off-the-grid electric vehicle supply equipment, which includes its own internal solar and battery systems, but they are more expensive than your normal level 2 or DCFC charger. So historically, they weren't an option for our block grant programs.
And I can add to that a little bit. One of the projects I worked on before I came over to CARB was a grid resiliency, grid innovation. There are about 40 tribes. And for the most part, these tribes are located at the ends the distribution and transmission system. So they're first subject to power shutoffs and some other things, some intermittencies. But that's that's one example. In the urban environment in LA, there's reliability issues with respect to the grids, and so it's not just a tribal or rural or remote or an urban. This is all communities. So all of these communities are looking for resiliency, for reliability, not just for their transportation, but for their residential, their commercial, for these spaces as well. And this is a good question in that it refocuses and should include in this transportation electrification paradigm the built environment. That is equally important to generation, whether it's renewable or DER, demand energy response solutions, or some of these other things that where transportation can enhance, or the built environment can enhance transportation. But certainly looking at the larger decarbonization strategies and grid reliability.
Now I'll jump in with a slightly different answer, which is from our data in HVIP. Yes, we've definitely come up against challenges and delays, but not as often as you would think. So very often, I think critics of zero emission or the regulation will say, oh, we can't do it. There's, the grid's not ready. So we went back and we actually looked at all of the HVIP cancellations over the past few years and found that infrastructure installation delays ranked, number 4th or 5th actually in reasons for the cancellations. The top reasons had more to do with either the trucks themselves or the dealers or market conditions or many other reasons. So I think that that's interesting to point out that in many cases, the infrastructure can be done. And then most often the ones that are canceled, you can imagine, were the very large and very complex ones, right? So huge fleets installing huge banks of fast chargers. For me in my work, when I think about, small businesses and small fleets, they might only need a couple of level 2 chargers to fuel their delivery trucks. And those are simple and straightforward installations. And the lead times for those have been getting shorter and shorter, and the delivery times for the trucks are also getting shorter and shorter. So I think that really positive signs there and good opportunities, especially in the smaller fleet segments.
Yeah, I think I would add on top of Nikki, really we're talking about very large capacities. One of the projects we had between CARB and the Energy Commission was drayage trucks, the heavy duty class. And there's some projects that are 100 trucks plus. And so those charging facilities, 15, 20 megawatt facilities, there's some assets alone in the freight facilities that are 1 to 2 megawatts, just pieces of equipment, the electrified rubber tire gantries. But the point is that these loads in these areas where the grids are not as resilient or stable need to be addressed, and they can be addressed through renewable solutions and other solutions as well.
Thanks so much, each of you, for your responses to that question, very interesting. I think, yeah, it's as Larry pointed out, there's some of those challenges with those very big projects, but there's definitely a lot of solutions, and in a lot of cases, those solutions are becoming more and more available. I'm seeing that we only have about 2 minutes left, so I wanted to leave it open to each of you if there's anything you wanted to share with the audience as a final remark in terms of what you presented on, or just the importance of sort of this topic in general. And then we can sort of close out and leave it there.
I'm very envious of some of the programs that are available in California. It would be amazing to have some of those here, particularly around used EVs and lower income. That's just something many of us have been lobbying for and hoping for, but so far hasn't happened up here, and hopefully eventually it will. But thanks for all your insights. It was really interesting for me as well.
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons why I enjoy this industry so much, is because even when I'm presenting material, I always walk away with new things that I've learned. So thank you so much to my co-presenters and to Sarah.
Yeah, thanks a lot for convening this. I think that it's such an important conversation. I mean, lots of folks, I worry, will think that maybe like the Justice 40 investments here in the States that will boil down to just a matter of, let's put certain things in certain zip codes. And it really goes so far beyond that about how we make sure that the benefits of what's going to be a huge industry shift are really getting to the folks who have been sort of most burdened by that industry in the past. So thank you.
Yeah, I also want to thank you for hosting. It's certainly great to be a partner with our other border partners in this. But to Kara's point, for the successes and what we're doing in California, there were a lot of lessons learned as well. And so we must take that into what we're sharing with communities so they understand, have a full scope and understanding, so that they can react and purchase the ZEVs and be part of the infrastructure assets going into the ground as well. So once again, thank you.
Thank you to each of you. Thank you so much for the presentations and such a wonderful discussion. And thank you to our audience for your questions and for tuning in to today's webinar. I hope it was interesting to all of you and you all walked away with learning something new. So thanks very much, everybody. Everyone take care, and hopefully we get another chance to talk about this topic soon.